Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Omnichannel X podcast. I am your host, Noz. I'm here with Amir Feizpour. We have recently bumped into each other in the AI community, and I was very excited to have him join us today to talk about some of the projects that he's doing over at his organization. All right, Amir, do you want to say hi and introduce yourself to the audience?
Sounds great. Thanks for having me, Naz. I'm a recovering quantum physicist is how I describe myself, and a recovering data scientist. And in the past 5 years or so, I've been running my startup, Aggregate Intellect. Generally speaking, very, very broadly speaking, we are very interested in the broad topic of knowledge management. For a few years, we were interested in that question for engineers. How can we use AI to help engineers manage all the technical documents around them better? And more recently, we are interested in the same type of question, but more for sales teams, because, well, that's where money is.
Yes, I have a similar trajectory in my past. Um, I used to specialize a lot more. I still do work in technical documentation, but now working a lot more in marketing and other types of knowledge content because gotta spread yourself out wider. It's hard always working in the back office, kind of deep in the trenches. So, what kind of work does your organization do? Well, your product company.
Yes and no. So we are a very unusual company. So a part of the unusualness about us is that we run a very large community of AI researchers and engineers
Mm,
and founders as well. We have more than 5,000 people globally in our community. The role of that community for us is, to some extent lead generation, but also, a very good talent source, but also source of inspiration and education, like the same way that we spend time educating them, they spend time educating us. So it's a very constructive and interesting, engaged community. Uh, and then on the technical side of things, we were previously working on a product, but post ChatGPT, we decided that that path was not necessarily lucrative for us to continue. So we open sourced what we had as a Python library, and most of the work that we do currently is around customizing that library for different customer use cases.
hmm
As I said, usually around automation of business workflows that are revenue generating, so sales, customer success, and those kind of things. I also do a lot of a startup advisory type of work, essentially working as fractional chief AI officer with different types of businesses and startups. Recently, we are trying to focus a little more specifically in the private equity space because we see that there are a lot of processes that they have there that need to be automated using AI or augmented. And the hope is that we eventually relaunch our product in a very most probably a vertical market software kind of thing in a fairly niche market. But currently, yeah, we're sort of in a bit of a transition phase between all the things that has been happening in the past and the forward-looking future that we're imagining.
So, can you tell me a little bit about the what are the kind of like the business problems that you try to help people solve with AI?
Yeah, definitely. So um, there is a broad answer and then there is a more specific answer. So the way we work, and again, another part of our unusualness is that usually when we have a commercial project, I hire subcontractors from the community, create a team, and put them on the project. That means that in principle, we are able to work on any type of AI project because we have 5,000 people. They know all the things in AI. So it is relatively easy for me to find, two, three, five people that know, I don't know, computer vision, natural language processing, time series forecasting, LLMs, etc., put them together and, help them build. So that's what we can do. But what we usually do is essentially building ChatGPT-like systems for business workflows. So imagine you have you're a business, you have been collecting a lot of documents in terms of your knowledge. They could live inside your Google Drive, inside your Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, etc. And that's part of your sales process. A request comes in from like a customer for a lead, from a lead, and you want to write a proposal to them. You want to, engage with them. So our system can come sit on top of these types of documents. And I saying documents because that's the harder thing, but it can also interface with more structured data like the CRM data, for example, and essentially bring all of these together and give you, for example, a chat interface where you could talk to the system and say, hey, I'm writing a proposal for customer A. Here are the transcripts of the conversations we've had with them. Here is, what the URL of their website is. In what we describe an agentic way, go to all these resources, find the necessary information, bring them back, put it together as a proposal document. And it is a human in the loop process because we don't want to replace humans. We don't think that's responsible or useful. So it's a human in the loop type of process. So essentially, the human interacts with AI, collaborate to write a proposal, finalize it, and send it out to the customer. So the business impact ultimately is enabling the same sales staff or customer support staff to handle a much larger volume of interactions with the customers that are more personalized and not, just blanket, same message to all people kind of thing.
So I think that you're the perfect person for me to ask this question. How do organizations like yourself differentiate themselves? Like how do people know whether they need to go beyond what they're all getting? So I'm going to clients, everybody's being handed either Microsoft Copilot or some enterprise license of ChatGPT. How do they know when they need more than that? What is the role of other organizations in this space? I think the common market kind of feels like those are your options. Do we go Microsoft / ChatGPT, or do we go or do we go Google? But I don't know how many people are actually going Google these days. But that's the kind of concept. So it's kind of a one brand or two brand market at the moment. So how do you what are you doing differently, and how do we start to explain that the general tools that everyone's getting shoved under their nose maybe not suitable for all use cases? I'm not asking you for a sales pitch. I'm asking to understand, to kind of break this down of what is the difference between the approach that these kind of big enterprise-wide, here's some AI, go be productive, approaches that are happening with what you think the future is going to look like.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting question, and a question that I've been trying to answer for the past 18 months, since ChatGPT pretty much. I don't think anybody has very good answers, but I can tell you why our customers come to us. So it's very common amongst our customers that the conversation starts at saying, hey, I'm using ChatGPT Plus. It does 80% of what I want, but this 20% that is really important to me, this very last mile, is the place where it is falling apart, right? So this could be in terms of a specificity of the responses. Even if you're uploading some documents in ChatGPT Plus, it's still not giving you exactly what you want, and you have very limited control. This is the canonical build versus buy dilemma, right? Like, it is doing most of what I want, but not exactly the last mile. So can you help me customize this to become this last mile that I need? Because for my business differentiation, the customer would say, I need this last mile, right?
Yeah.
So that's one scenario, like really getting the specificity of the system to the level that is desired for their type of business, right? So that's one example.
We're going to come back to that. What specificity means exactly?
Yes,
please go
absolutely.
go on.
And the second reason that people would come to us is when the integration that needs to happen is non-trivial. So Microsoft Copilot is a good example because the Copilot lives inside the tools that you already use. Like, you're using Microsoft Word, you're using Teams or whatever else. So this is not necessarily available in all products. Like some products do have it, most products will launch it. But sometimes what you really need is a Copilot that sits inside your Microsoft Teams, but is integrating with the internet and with your ERP and your whatever else, right?
Hmm.
So essentially the integration that needs to happen is beyond the product family that you're dealing with, right? Your ERP might be, I don't know, Epicor, might be whatever else. Your system might be, some of your data, your CRM might be in Salesforce. Some of your important data might be in a system that is not really a big system, but needs to interface with all of those. So that really creating the integration that captures the whole workflow rather than just a point solution that
Hmm.
only helps you write better, etc., it is a very important part. ChatGPT Enterprise is interesting because it's a standalone app that you have to babysit. We do see a lot of pushback on adding, yet another app that you have to babysit. And there's a lot of desire for these types of systems to live inside the tools where you're spending most of your time
Hmm.
working, right? So,
Right. Okay, so that resonates with what I've been experiencing. So, um, the way that I was just in New York giving a training on AI last week, and this is a big, one of the biggest multinational pharmaceutical companies. But what's the way that the rollout has happened is they've literally been handed a skin over ChatGPT and maybe Claude, and they're they have to kind of just chat with it. It's completely distinct and siloed from all their other business systems. And here at Omnichannel X, that's our big thing.
yeah.
We don't want to be siloing data. We don't want to be siloing content. And so what you're saying is that something like Copilot lives inside Microsoft Office, and so it's going to be able to access your repository of like SharePoint files or the rest of the Microsoft ecosystem. But as big as Microsoft is not our whole enterprise stack.
Right.
So we
Absolutely.
still need to be connecting those systems together. Um, yeah, absolutely. I do find it a little bit absurd that we're having to like copy and paste documents, like download them to our local machine and then upload them into the chat bot, have them be processed there. There's it's very it's very funny because it's the most advanced technology humanity has ever produced, and it's very hand cranked at
Mhm.
the moment. It's
That's right.
very it reminds me of the old cars where you had to start them up and so it was like a
Yeah,
lawnmower. It's very the user experience is currently quite absurdly bad.
absolutely.
But I want to come back to this uh,
A specificity.
specificity question. So getting better answers, a more specific answer. Let's double click on that, because I think that what I found is that most business users are playing around. They're
Yep.
using it to I went around the room. There was 15 people in the training room. I would say that 12 out of 15, all they had done was getting like grammar and structure checking on their emails. Like that's the level of, help me write this document. Like basically we got, I don't know how many people on this in the listening remember Clippy.
Yes.
Clippy was a Microsoft AI assistant that they tried to
Yep.
launch when I was in high school.
Mhm.
Um, and it was like, oh, I'm going to help you write a letter. So, so 30 years later, we've achieved Clippy. Great. That's not really what that's not
Yep.
expressing the potential of this. So getting beyond, helping me with my already existing day-to-day kind of writing tasks.
Yep.
Can you break down a little bit some of these use cases that are able to be opened up or accelerated?
Yeah, absolutely. So imagine imagine the scenario I was talking about, where a salesperson, a sales engineer, for example, is putting together a proposal to send to a customer. They just talked to, they have a transcript, they have the address of their website, they have some internal policies about how this should be done, blah, blah, blah. And this person goes to ChatGPT and copy paste some of these, puts it in a prompt, spends a lot of time writing prompts and then hoping for the best and probably iterating a bunch of times, getting something that is kind of like sort of 70, 80% there, bring it out, spend another half an hour massaging it, send it out. So that's the current user experience. So imagine the user
In
experience
an ideal state.
in an ideal state where you know what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah.
So now compare this experience to the following, where all you need to do is to tell the system that I'm talking to company X. I need to write a proposal. So no prompt engineering, no copy pasting anything, etc. So the system immediately analyzes what the operator has said, identifies company X, looks up their identifier, fetches the right transcript, fetches the right CRM data. Maybe from the CRM data, it knows what their URL, their website URL is, goes to that website, scrapes the information from that website, etc., etc. So it just fetches all the information because you just told it that this is what we're trying to do, and the system is designed to have this control flow, have this workflow that I would do manually otherwise. So it does all of these things agentically, and then fetches back the information, puts it all together, crafts the prompt for you, sends it to the LLM, gets the response, does a bunch of verifications on it saying, okay, are these types of details necessary? Is the name written correctly? Is the name of the customer written correctly? Can we fact check some of these sentences against the information we scrape to make sure there's
So who's doing this? The AI or the
the
human?
machine is doing all of
The
this.
machine is doing all this.
Right. So the machine is doing all of this, probably is giving you a log of what it is doing, like opening the website and scraping the information, like, I don't know, fetching whatever, writing the proposal now, verifying names, verifying entities, verifying numbers, verifying fact checking, etc. So it is giving you a log of things that are happening.
Like a
And
progress bar.
what's that?
Like a progress bar.
Right, absolutely. And then occasionally it says, hey, I found this information, but I'm not sure if we should take policy A or policy B in writing to them. What do you think? And then you, as the operator, you're like, well, actually, based on their body gesture, when I said whatever, I think policy A is more appropriate, right? So there is a bunch of tacit knowledge that the operator has that is not available anywhere externalized. So it can occasionally use the operator also as an agent and be like, hey, can you clarify this? Can you help me make this decision? So this system is just crunching away at this task. We are 5 minutes in, like it is not 2 hours later. We are 5 minutes in, and it generates a proposal. And at this point, nothing is hallucinated because the entities were checked, the sentences were checked, the numbers were checked, the details of the website were checked, and the specificity of the proposal is accurate because it is personalized to the customer you're sending this to. Everything is fact checked, everything is checked against the references, citations exist in the right places. So the specifics of the thing that is written is clear because we are going beyond personalization. We are going to, this is a specific proposal for this a specific customer with the specific details that I want to exist, right? So that's
Right.
what I'm talking about.
Okay, Amir. So we've used this agentic word a couple times. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that means?
Yeah, for sure. So agents is the buzzword of the day. It's the new hype. Whatever ChatGPT was 18 months ago, that's what agents are today. In my opinion, and this might be controversial, but most people don't understand what they're saying when they say agents, and they call anything agents because that's cool for marketing purposes.
I gotta say that's the buzz in the AI community. I can tell
Okay,
you
yes.
that in the general public, nobody's talking about agents.
Okay, great. Well, so I've been actually going around asking people, what do you think agents are? And no two people have given me the same definition so far. So that's part of it. And if you look at history of intelligence in general, even into 50s, people were talking about intelligent agents.
Yeah.
But back then they meant, oh, a thing that can crunch numbers faster than I can do. So sort of like this definition of agent is, evolving over time
Hmm.
because there are things that we reserve for human cognition, like whatever. And the latest thing was language because we were like, oh, only humans have this complex language, and all of a sudden machines can do it too. So now the thing that is reserved for humans is agency, really, is the ability to reason and make decisions. So now the definition is there. So essentially an agent is a system that can make decisions and based on those decisions plan something, and based on that plan go execute the components of the plan and come back and give me whatever my objective was. So that's really what I'm trying to say, is that the definition is something that is very fluid and is just changing based on what we reserve for human cognition. And all of a sudden that bubble bursts, and then we're like, okay, we still have this thing that machines can not do, therefore that's what agency is. But the formal definition, the most recent formal definition is in the context of reinforcement learning. And
Right.
that's the one we are borrowing in the context of LLMs. So essentially, an LLM agent is a system that can use large language models to do three specific things. One of these things is tool usage. So
Hmm.
it should be able to, on its own, to interact with different types of tools. And when I say tools, I'm talking about Google search. I'm talking about running some data analysis. I'm talking about querying some structured database, like writing SQL queries and getting some structured data back. So tool usage.
Calculator.
Right, absolutely. The second component is a memory. So this memory is contextually keeping track of everything that is happening and everything that is relevant. So if I'm writing a proposal for you, this memory is all the things that matter about you. I keep track of them. It keeps track of new things I find about you and put it inside this memory, etc. These two are relatively straightforward with large language models. The first one because language models can write formal language, aka code, and the second one because we have had databases for many, many years. We know how to create a persistent memory of something. The last one is planning capabilities. Planning requires reasoning. You have to be able to reason that this complex task has these components, and these components need these tools to carry them out. Um, and that's the part that things fall apart, because large language model can pretend reasoning, they can parrot reasoning, but they're not really grounded in any type of counterfactual mechanisms to give them reasoning capabilities.
Hmm.
So therefore, they cannot decompose a task into subtasks reliably. They can pretend that they do, but they can't do it.
Reliably. I think the reliably is a key word there.
Absolutely. And then second thing that is very important about agents, and comes back to reasoning again, is the ability to reflect and say, I tried to do this thing, like what we are doing here. Like I'm trying to say something. If I said wrong, I reflect on it and go back and correct it. Right.
Hmm.
So that ability is very, very primitive in large language models, unless we design them to do that and we give them tools to do that, et cetera, which comes down to what we are doing these days in systems that are more properly built as agentic, which is creating a lot of policies which are sometimes complete heuristics. Like we very specifically, I tell the system, oh, these types of queries go to these subset of actions. You could choose the right one, and this is the way you measure what good means. And if it is in this band of good, you can give the system a feedback about what it needs to correct. So it's still like a lot of my thought process and business logic dictated into the software, and it
Hmm.
follows that because it's not very reliable in decision making about planning and then reflecting. So I just largely hard code these into the system, and that becomes what I like to call, in comparison to autonomous vehicles, a level 3 automation, a level 3 autonomy in a system, but it's still, a semi-autonomous agent that is carrying out a business workflow.
Okay, so you lost me at level three because I don't know levels one and two.
Okay.
What I did get is that this capacity to use tools. That's the definition that I've heard. Is agents are able to use tools and execute more complex tasks more or less more on their own than what we're getting from you, what we're getting available commonly today.
Yeah,
Okay. Great. I'm glad that we did that. Okay. So you're cutting to the heart of one of the concerns with generative AI, which is, can I trust what it's producing?
absolutely.
Right. Because
Absolutely.
if I'm going to insert these digital colleagues into my life, um, I have to be able to, if I'm going to team with them, we have to build a trusting relationship. And that's
100%.
very like, I'm training people on AI and they say, can I put this PowerPoint of marketing research into it? I'm like, it's not going to be able to understand that.
Yes.
Like it, and the most concerning thing is that it has this very, you know, happy go lucky supportive attitude where it says, sure, whatever you tell it to do, it will try to do it to the best of its ability. Sometimes people get insulted that I use this kind of intern, comparing it to interns. Um, but the fact is, I've had junior employees and I give them an instruction and they go, yeah, great, absolutely, and they go for it and they're working away, and I come back the next day or 2 hours later or a week later or whatever, and I'm like, okay, let's talk about how they're getting on. And I
Yes.
look at what they're doing and I'm going, oh my god, no, no, I'm sorry, I know, I didn't say that because it didn't occur to me that I had to explain that. And they've kind of gone on, and so they have the same sort of can do attitude,
Yep.
and with generative AI they'll make up information,
Mhm.
if they don't have the right information. So you're saying that you're putting in place something that where the generative AI is the interface,
Yep.
but the actual content is coming from your existing business systems.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a very good way to think about it, where like I have these 9 commandments that I usually talk about when it comes to generative AI. And one of them, which I think is the most important one, is the separating the knowledge, the data, and the linguistic interface, which
Mm-hmm.
is the large language model.
Mm-hmm.
I usually describe a large language model as a recent English grad. So it is a person that is super good at language. Like you ask them to do any type of language task, like summarize, like what is the sentiment of this? Here is a bunch of things, annotate them, etc. Super good at that. But then we're, hoping that it can do finance for us, and then, use all of the coding that do all of the coding that we have, and reason through what my journey should be like when I'm traveling to Italy, and etc. Right? And it can parrot that pretty well because it's a very well-read, English grad, but ultimately it's a linguistic interface. So what you really need to do to make sure that the last mile problem doesn't exist is to ground it. Like you have to tell it that here is the data I trust, here is the documents I trust, and here are the processes that should sit on top of this data. And those processes actually address one of the most other common problems that people have with these systems, which is access control, privacy, security. Like when you're separating these layers, you could put all of these on top of your data. And then if you're asking a question versus me, if you have a higher access level, then the response to you should be different versus mine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're asking the same questions. So you could add all of these different nuances like controlling the behavior of the system, controlling the specific details, controlling access, controlling privacy. And then all of this is just falling out of this very simple design principle of separating the data and the linguistic interface and just counting on the large language model as that interface. And that's all that it
Yeah.
is.
I'm very happy to hear that. So I did an article a little while back called "The Unreliable Computer Revolution," which is, how do we work with something which knows how to do one task very well, which is speaking,
Yeah.
and because it speaks like a human, and now with the recent OpenAI demonstrations, can sound like a human to
Yeah.
our ears, with emotion and tone and singing and harmonizing and giggling and coughing and hesitating and all these things that humans do. uh, we we start to feel, okay, well, I can teach this thing to work like a human, but it's got the language part.
Right.
um, we want the best of both worlds. We want it to be interface just like a human, but then be accurate and reliable just like a computer. And it's not. It's just not. Um, so that I'm very interested in that dichotomy, and I'm trying to, whenever I'm kind of working with people, I'm always telling them, don't go with your heart. Like, don't trust this thing. It does sound like it's the perfect almighty, artificial being who can now make your dreams come true
Yeah,
of being able to do whatever you want with your content and data. But if it's just the language part, then all the math and the security and the deep logic and so on that we know that we rely on computers on for today when we use spreadsheets and tools like that. You're putting in place some kind of separation between these things.
absolutely.
Can do you work on actually putting in additional systems that might not already be in the business? So are you always just stringing together existing systems, or I'm specifically, I've got in the back of my mind knowledge graphs, which I know I've been reading a lot of research. Gartner has finally recognized them as one of the most immediate and important parts of the AI stack, and which is really makes me happy because we've been talking about knowledge graphs for years and years and years. Are
Absolutely.
you putting in any systems that kind of model the knowledge additionally to what's already in place?
Um, yes and no. Like it really depends on a use case. There are usually um, there are usually some data sets that are missing in almost every use case.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the majority of the knowledge data or the source data is there within their systems, and that's what they're using. What is missing is the tacit knowledge that is
Mm-hmm.
in people's heads, as well as the rubrics around what good means, like
Mm-hmm.
essentially evaluating if the system is still performing the right subtasks that will accumulate and compound to the final objective that you have. So that's often completely missing. So a lot of the work we do is around creating data sets that are evaluation sets that are around measuring is this good or not.
Mm-hmm.
What we have found though,
Yeah,
uh,
so I was thinking like you can give it 100 good proposals and say, analyze these and do your proposals like that. But it's a different thing completely to actually write down, this is what makes a good proposal, this is what makes a bad proposal.
absolutely, absolutely. And you could do what you described, but it will only give you the linguistic quality of a good proposal if
Mm-hmm.
that's all you're doing. But oftentimes you have to go back and say it is good because it said this specific thing about this specific customer, because
Mm-hmm.
good is usually contextual, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily something that is generally speaking in language, this is coherent, therefore this
Mm-hmm.
is good. Like that,
Oh,
that's like the
accuracy as
baseline.
well.
Right.
Accuracy. So
Absolutely.
if someone makes a mistake with a product name or uses out of date information,
Yeah.
linguistically it's perfect,
Right.
but factually it's wrong.
That's right. Absolutely. And and in terms of knowledge graphs, what we have found, I'm a huge fan of knowledge graphs, and the product we were building before ChatGPT was heavily knowledge graph based. And what we have found after larger language models came out is that the value of knowledge graphs is really about explicit modeling of knowledge, which is, here are a bunch of concepts and here are how they are related to each other in a directional way or not. Uh, and language models are very good at modeling that type of information. Like you can give them a bunch of text, they can understand what the concepts are and how concepts are related to pretty well. Like especially if you're fine tuning a language model to capture those kind of information. So oftentimes in the majority of business use cases we do, that is not necessary. There is a caveat though, and the caveat is if you do not want to do fine tuning, and if it is easy for you to put together a graph or a taxonomy where a lot of relationships that are non-trivial and are not part of the general language, like if Apple means something different in the context of our business,
Mm-hmm.
then those kind of things should be modeled in a taxonomy or a dictionary, or again, like being explicitly a knowledge graph is less important than creating the right data structure that gives you those kind of information. What I have found is that most companies have some version of this because at least in their training documentation for like I'm onboarding a new salesperson, they have to go through a bunch of documentations. sometimes these documentations contain the glossaries and how different things are related to each other, et cetera, et cetera. So most of the time, at most, we have to grab those, analyze them, and transform them in a data structure that is more suitable to be used. But often it is captured there. So not knowledge graphs specifically, but augmenting the data they have, especially to ground it, to give it like the glossaries of definitions, to give it specific relationships that are non-trivial. Those are definitely part of the game if you don't want to do fine-tuning. If you do fine-tuning, then it pretty well replaces a lot of the necessity for an explicit knowledge graph. And of course, like there is a ceiling in what I'm saying. At some point, introducing that explicit relationships is going to be helpful. But usually the cost of building a high quality knowledge graph surpasses the value you get to it until you hit that ceiling. And you go through all of the low hanging fruits to increase the quality of the system. And then the next best thing to try is the knowledge graph, for example.
Yeah, I think also depends on the part of the business. So for example,
Absolutely.
I'm thinking about, in sales of a certain type, we could get pretty far in that with that method. But when I'm thinking about for some of the more the knowledge workers, or like the documentation workers, or for people who are working deep in the product itself, if it's a large complex product, then it makes all the difference whether this, if this customer wants this particular parameter set in their solution, then that has these implications. You really the product itself, the is one of the things that can be so complex, or the regulatory situation, for example, could be so complex. If you're talking about drugs or something like that, that you need to model that, and no one has really done it before. It's all kind of manual checking. Every time customer wants A, somebody takes that, goes over there, looks up the right document, finds out who's got the latest version of blah blah blah, then copies and pastes the right paragraph. And so replacing all that in some, it depends. I think it really depends. So I can see that. I can see it being overkill for a lot of scenarios. But I do see, so especially some of the customers that I work with who are deep in very complex markets and products, that it becomes important faster. Let's put it that way.
So I think you're right. That is definitely one of the solutions that one should look at. The question always comes down to, if I grab a smaller large language model, not the large language model that I'm using as the interface, but a smaller large language model, and fine tune it on that documentation, does the lift that I get, because that's a cheaper exercise than building a high quality knowledge graph. Does the ratio of the lift I get from that to the cost of doing it surpass the cost of building a high quality knowledge graph, and the ratio of that and the lift I get from that? Like that's just a very simple, that's a relatively straightforward comparison that needs to be done. But like if the first one doesn't give you what you need, the lift you need, then absolutely, looking at and the challenge I have with knowledge graphs is that automated ways to construct them usually fall pretty short. So it needs, human annotation to get them right. And that's the thing that makes them very expensive.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying they're a cheap undertaking, for sure. Yeah, it's just it depends. So are you working with like the models that everyone knows, like ChatGPT and Gemini, or are you using open source models, or are you more niche models, or maybe something else altogether? And do you think that there's a role for multiple of these models playing together?
The very last thing you said. So generally speaking, one of our design philosophies is around modularity as much as possible. And the reason that you do modularity is robustness in general, right? So if you want to build robust systems, you want to reduce single points of failure as much as possible. And I'm not even talking about duplicating effort. Like I'm not saying, oh, have both OpenAI and Cloud and Gemini in case you need to fall back on them. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about,
not redundancy.
that's good, right? That's a good practice in some cases, but what I'm talking about is, going back to what I was saying earlier, that, we sit down and understand the workflow very deeply. And part of the reason that we do that is that we want to essentially have a smaller models take care of some parts of the workflow. And then those models would feed the large language model. That there you have a choice. Like if OpenAI is the best choice, that's great. Let's go with that, etc. But really breaking down the task into subtasks and having a specialized models handle those
Mhm.
is usually the way to get the most robust possible systems.
And fast. I think that like
Absolutely.
we were doing this training course and we're using like the biggest OpenAI model, and every time we do anything, there's this kind of ho hum, kind of do, waiting for it to actually process and come up with an answer. It's like, again, we're going back to computing in the 80s, where you hit go and then you kind of go get a cup of coffee. It's not that bad, but it's not a for complex tasks.
Right.
It's not. It's absolutely not instantaneous. So I don't know if many people are even kind of aware of this, but a lot of these models, like Anthropic's Claude or Gemini or the Apple one, they come in these t-shirt sizes, small, medium, large, and there's a lot of effort to get ones that can run on a telephone. And then the other ones are running on the biggest data centers in the world. And you don't want to use the huge ones to do basic tasks that one of the smaller ones could do well. So that's what I'm getting, that you're, because it's going to be much, much, much slower if you keep putting everything through this huge beast.
That's right.
When a smaller, faster one could do this, could do the task just as well.
Yeah. It could do it faster and better, right? So like with the client, when we had started engaging, they were using GPT-4 everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And, a month later, their system is a very tiny model that I don't even consider machine learning, that is handling a big task that they were using GPT-4 for more accurately, more reliably. And because of the existence of that model, they could downgrade to GPT 3.5, which is faster, cheaper, etc. And then now the combined system of these two is working better than GPT-4 was. So,
Yes.
but that only came because we really sat them down and said, you're a human. When you do this, what is the logic? What are the steps you go through? And just replicated that into the architecture.
Yes. So I love this because I talk a lot about this, the AI anatomy. That you need to think of, okay, what part of this is the brain, what part is the hands, and what part is the what part of the brain, the frontal cortex versus your
Yes.
memory versus etc. So I what's being marketed by companies like OpenAI is the one perfect thing. Here's the solution for all your problems.
Yes.
And I've been dealing with that my whole career, of companies coming out and going, no, 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 we have the one perfect thing that you should buy for all your problems. Um, and it's never that. That's never the case. You always want to think about, what is my company actually doing, and how does this problem break down, and what is the appropriate technology to use where in that process, and where do we still need humans in that process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of my biggest design principles is that the architecture or the anatomy, as you're saying, of the system you're building has to replicate the human workflow. At least for now. Like I understand that, airplanes fly the way that is very different than the way the nature does.
Mm-hmm.
But the many, many, many first iterations of it, we're trying to replicate nature, and that's the only way that we learn how to fly better than nature. So for the foreseeable future, before intelligence has a different architecture, eventually it will, most probably, as flying it has, or as moving on the ground has. But the very, very first steps of it has to replicate that, because that's where we have to get to first in order to understand how to go beyond it.
Okay, awesome. All right, fantastic. So this will be you'll be one of our first guests who's ever done this. So I want to thank you very much, Amir, for joining us today. We are going to jump over to the Truth Collapse podcast and talk a little bit about how these issues go beyond the enterprise. What happens when we talk about AI not just solving tasks, but really going beyond nature, becoming becoming part of our culture, part of our world, part of our institutions, and with not a couple of big companies, but tens of thousands of little AIs doing different things all over the place, as ubiquitous as computers and computing is today. So we're going to look at all the implications of that. I'm very excited. So thank you, Amir. Thank you to my listeners, and we'll see you over there on the Truth Collapse podcast if you want to join us.
Thanks for having me.